You know what the worst feeling in the world is? You probably don't need me to tell you. It's feeling that things are not right. I mean, cosmically not right. That things are not as they should be. That you're not where you're supposed to be. It's feeling like the person that you dreamed of becoming is just slipping away. Like a mirage vanishing over the horizon. Like the meaning of your life has just kind of slowly been bleached out of the picture. I know. I've been there many, many times. And it sucks. In many ways, it sucks far worse than any external hardship. Nietzsche once remarked that he who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. And it's true. But without purpose, without meaning, what use are the comforts of modern life? As a young man, I spent a lot of time traveling in India and Nepal. I met countless people who had nothing at all in the world, and I mean true, heartbreaking poverty, the kind we're not even exposed to here, but people who yet somehow had everything because they had a sense of meaning, a sense of transcendent connection to the universe. But when I returned to America, suddenly it just seemed like a living graveyard to me. A country with all the material comforts in the world, and yet where people are hollow and empty and sick inside and miserable. That's true poverty. And that's why I've dedicated my life to bringing the true techniques of true spirituality to the world. Everything from Western magic to Eastern yoga to Buddhism and a lot more. And believe me, a lot more. I spent decades putting this together. I've collected the very best of the best at magic.me, my online school for magic, mysticism, and meditation. Because I don't just want you to live your best life, I want you to have your soul back, your true self, your true will, your very reason for existing. Magic.me is an online school that gives you everything that you need to master your mind and thereby master your life. That's because it clearly and directly presents the very best techniques of magic, meditation, ritual, and consciousness change from the world's spiritual and esoteric traditions. And what that really means is that you get millennia of spiritual training all in one place and in one structured training system. It is literally the best magical training in the world. Magic.me downloads those raw techniques right into your brain. You can flash upgrade yourself by learning chaos magic, meditation, esoteric yoga, the tarot, I Ching, astral projection, how to achieve peak mental and physical energy, how to unlock your true will, and lots more. That means you get all of these techniques right now without having to wade through piles of confusing books written by people who probably, frankly, never practiced what they preached. And that means that you are literally 1 week away from becoming a full-on, geared-up, practicing magician, gaining full control of your life and absolute clarity on your true will. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're probably thinking that sounds amazing, but I just don't have the time for that, unfortunately. Well, good news. Magic.me is constructed in small, bite-sized, 5-minute units that you can watch on your own schedule, even during a bathroom break at work. You know, the extra long ones that you take just to get away from your boss and coworkers for half a second. Plus, instead of spending decades and literally over hundreds of thousands of dollars to learn this material by trial and error, as I did, Magic.me hands you the keys to everything for only $49 a month. Yearly and lifetime packages are even more generous. And not only do you get access to every class, but you also get access to the Magician's Workshop, which guides you through a structured course of study to master every skill in detail, step by step. You also get access to our bi-weekly live sessions, where I help students one-on-one and guide them through any challenges they may be having in their practice or blockages they may be having in their life. You'll also get access to our private community, where you'll be able to hang out with, learn from, and collaborate with other students on the path. Of course, it goes without saying that all this comes with a full money-back guarantee, so that you can try it out and see if it's for you. If it's not, that's fine. I'll fully refund your money, no questions asked, as long as it's in line with the terms on the site. Although frankly, nobody ever takes me up on that offer. They're just too blown away by the tremendous amount of valuable information and truly life-changing experiences that they find waiting for them. Magic.me is the very model of what a 21st century magical school should look like, and my students love it. Sound good? Okay. You can start learning right now at www.magic.me. That's magick.me. I'll see you in class. My guest today is the author Erik Davis, who I will introduce in the intro to this show. There were unfortunately several technical errors with this show, which I apologize for, and also to Erik. This has been almost 3 months since I recorded the interview. I have done my best to fix the recording issues, which were caused by the fact that I was trying to turn this into a video interview, and that didn't go as planned, unfortunately. So the audio is not as great as I would like it to be, but the information is great, and I hope you really enjoy the show. Erik Davis is an author, podcaster, award-winning journalist, and independent scholar based in San Francisco. His wide-ranging work focuses on the intersection of alternative religion, media, and the popular imagination. He is the author, most recently, of Nomad Codes, Adventures in Modern Esoterica. He also wrote The Visionary State, A Journey Through California's Spiritual Landscape, a short critical volume on Led Zeppelin, and the much-celebrated Techgnosis, Myth, Magic, and Mysticism in the Age of Information, which is still in print after 20 years. That's awesome. Erik's scholarly and popular essays on music, technoculture, and spirituality have appeared in scores of books, magazines, and journals, and his writing has been translated into a dozen languages. That's amazing. He explores the cultures of consciousness on his long-running weekly podcast, Expanding Mind, on the Progressive Radio Network, and he has been interviewed for numerous documentaries and by CNN, the BBC, Public Radio, and New York Times. And I saw you also used to write for the much-missed Village Voice. I was very sad when that closed down. He graduated from Yale University, served as a rock critic for many years, and earned his PhD in religious studies at Rice University. His forthcoming book, High Weirdness, Drugs, Esoterica, and Visionary Experience in the 70s, will be out in the spring of 2019 through MIT Press and Strange Attractor. Oh, that's awesome. You're working with
Mark Pilkington. Oh yeah,
how's he doing?
He's great. You know, he's an old pal of mine. I think we met in 01 or 02, and became fast friends right away. And it's been incredibly satisfying to work on this huge project. You know, years and years and years went into this book. Boiled down, it was a dissertation. Now it's a book. And to be able to produce the book with my friend in the very like independent small press sense that I have incredible input on the cover, on the design, on how the footnotes are laid out, all these sort of itty bitty things that you don't get with a big publisher. And then at the same time, MIT Press was interested in co-publishing it, so it uses their sales system, their marketing, and their kind of official stamp of class. So it's a great combo for me. It really just worked out. I couldn't be happier.
So maybe if you could give us a little teaser or a little preview of, or just start off with where your mind's been at.
Sure. Well, the main thing that I like to kind of present about it. Overall is just the idea. One thing that I try to do right from the beginning is to establish that the idea of the weird is a more substantial category than we normally take it for. That it doesn't just refer to a kind of, it's funny when you think about it. It's the weird is one of those words where it's kind of hiding in plain sight. It's not something we take seriously very much in the way that we use it. But if you kind of pay close attention and track it, you start to see that there's a larger kind of worldview opening up. And that's something I try to kind of establish as a way into my subject matter, which happens to be the crazy, mostly psychedelic experiences of some famous white guys, dead white guys in the 1970s. So that's the kind of core thing that I'm looking at historically, culturally, philosophically. How do we think about these weird experiences? But I really start off with the weird because even like normies, we'll use the word, and you use the word to describe something you can't quite put somewhere. Or if you have like if you're not a believer in synchronicity, but then some strange synchronicity happens to you, telling someone, yeah, and then I said bike just as this bike went by, and then my friend came in and told me about this other bike, whatever it is. That was never not a very good one, but people go, yeah, it was really weird. It's like weird. It's like weird becomes this sort of place where you put things that are unusual or anomalous, but you're not making any claims about them. You're not saying it was paranormal, it was mystical, it was supernatural. No, you don't need to say that. You just need to kind of go, it was pretty weird. Like, it was weird. Or
kind of like the liminal zone, like where it's just at the periphery of awareness, but not enough to set off any alarm bells or break your normal daily trance, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, it is also a way to just kind of put something somewhere that it's not too threatening. And we all kind of acknowledge that it exists. It almost shares with the icky or something. It's just kind of like, this is kind of weird. But then when you go into it, you go, well, where does this word come from? What is its history? How does it feature? And the kind of the most obvious way we think about it now is in terms of weird as a genre, as a quality of a certain kind of fantasy, a certain kind of science fiction, certain kind of pop culture, a certain kind of exploitation fare. Comic books were the sites of the weird, designs for hot rods, or indeed things like weird tales, which is of course where we get Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith and Robert E. Howard. So so then you're like, okay, great. It's also kind of an aesthetic, which is sort of like supernatural or uncanny, but also kind of pulp and a little cheesy or a little over the top, a little adolescent, a little greasy kid stuff. And to my mind, that all actually protects something that's actually really kind of profound and interesting. And then you go back and you start going, well, where does this word come from? How does it develop? And we go back to Shakespeare, and you go back to the idea of fate, and the weird sisters, and you find that it's actually a very, very rich, interesting word that kind of goes into our poetry. It goes into this kind of aesthetic world. So on one hand, the weird is an aesthetic world, and if it's just, but if I was just talking about the aesthetic side of it, the way it's kind of like like Lovecraft or some weird fiction or some weird TV show that you've seen that you kind of like or whatever, that would only be so interesting. But it's more than that. It's also a social position that people are weirdos. And it's not necessarily a great thing to be a weirdo. And it's been a feature of like 20th century counterculture where like weirdo meant sometimes a little bit of a pervert even, but it was definitely somebody you didn't want to hang around. Like, it wasn't like, oh, he's a rebel, or, you know what I mean? Like
R. Crumb or something like that.
Well, it's a great, R. Crumb, makes this comic, collection magazine, Weirdo, I think that starts in the very early 80s. And that kind of captures it. It's on the one hand, there's like, strange esoteric things. And then there's like street underground comics, and there's kind of quotidian tales of sort of outlandish characters or Harvey Pekar and things like that. And it all just kind of captures that the weird is not just an aesthetic, but it's also a kind of social position that has to do with the counterculture. But then finally, and this is what makes it interesting, is the third prong of my witch's cauldron, is in a way the most important one, which is that it's an ontological space, meaning that there's something about reality that is weird, or weirdness is a way into an aspect of how things are. And I talk about this in a lot of ways. Part of it is like, where do you put the paranormal if you don't want to make a claim about some other source, or even to use the language of the paranormal? The weird is a place to do it. But more importantly,
because it's not socially threatening.
It's not socially threatening. Exactly. It does not, you're not kind of like outing yourself as a believer, which, I think is fine to be, into the paranormal in its own terms.
So it's a bit, but it functions kind of like ironic distance.
Yeah, I think it does. It does. But again, it conceals this possibility that without making any supernatural claims. Nothing about some elaborate metaphysical cosmos or other planes of being or anything like that. It's saying that there's things in reality, just reality as it is, that are profoundly anomalous, strange, vaguely wonderful, but also kind of ominous and threatening and a little icky. And the place that I really thought that was significant was tracing where in the discourse of physics that people started to talk about quantum weirdness. Like where that phrase, we know it. It's like it's a common use in pop culture or in pop science too. Even scientists will use it. Where did it come from? Why, what is it there for? What is it kind of saying? And of course, it's saying something we all know, those of us who are interested in physics and quantum physics, even if we're just, guys in the peanut gallery, we know that it's saying that now, however you interpret it, and there's a lot of different ways to interpret quantum physics, it shows that reality is functioning very differently than our ordinary naive realism takes it to
Definitely. be. That's really, I love how you put that. And the thing I want to zero in on there, because I've thought it many times and wrestled with it quite a bit in my life, is this idea you articulated about weirdness and this kind of cultural space being a protective capsule in a way, or a liminal zone or a protective zone. And for instance, when I was first getting into all this stuff, I think I first started getting into all this stuff in my early teens, when I was working in a bookstore. Before I could actually legally work, I was already working in a bookstore, and I was just reading all this counterculture stuff, and so I became, like caught up in the carny type miasma of the counterculture. And there was like everything you're talking about, like the Ed Big Daddy Roth paintings, and at the time like the Jim Rose circus sideshow, and all the stuff that Feral House was putting out at this time, like the whole kind of counterculture kitsch world with like tiki bar aesthetics, and particularly, California in particular has this. But for me, like, it was just like, for me, it was like fighting through a swamp. It's like, I wanted to get through that stuff because it didn't really appeal to me that much. And I wanted to, but I noticed, I zeroed in on the fact that it was kind of like the outside of the temple, if you will. And somewhere in there was something really, really valuable that was being covered up by this kind of miasmic smokescreen of all this counterculture stuff. And so, when I came up with the phrase ultraculture, which was, I just wanted to zero in on that stuff and turn that into the focus instead of having the kitsch barrier. Actually, I think the late Paul Lawfully talked about at one point, I think in his essay in the Disinfo Book of Lies, the kitsch barrier as kind of like this ontological barrier between that would accelerate as we, towards the end of the 20th century and going forward into the 21st century. I don't remember exactly what he said about it, but it seems resonant with what you're saying here. And it actually, to be completely honest with you, it's become very frustrating for me because, certainly talking about occult ideas, I feel like in some ways I feel trapped in that kitsch zone. It's like I don't necessarily want to be there. But on the other hand, I don't necessarily want, I definitely would rather be there than in the realm of the true believers. Right. I mean, you go to some of these things like OTO functions or things like this, and you see people who are true believers. They don't have the kitsch barrier. Or just any, fringe religion or hippie alternative movement, or, you meet people who don't have the ironic distance. It's kind of profoundly disturbing for me. It's like, wait, hang on. Like, you literally 100% believe this? You need some distance here. You need to have the Robert Anton Wilson ability to step in and out of it, I think. So, I think that's all really well articulated, and I'm just mirroring back, like, yeah, it's like that feels like the kind of the thing that I've been wrestling with my whole life.
Sure. No, that's very well said. I mean, it's very resonant with my own experience. I mean, I'm a notch, farther down the mortality, ruler than you are. But
wait for CRISPR. Wait for CRISPR. Then we will. some of us living now may never die.
I don't know how to feel about that. Even that's another question. But my experience was pretty similar growing up in Southern California, and mine was probably a little bit more the the dregs of the '60s counterculture. So that hence a bit more on the spiritual tip, and then later on in the '80s, watching the kind of development of the Amok books and the all of the California, the Tiki, all that stuff kind of coming together. And yeah, I think you're very right. It's like the outside of the temple. And so what I'm looking at further in the book is I look at three well-known dead white guys from the 70s, Robert Anton Wilson, I talk about Timothy Leary a little bit, but Terence McKenna and Philip K. Dick. And I show how they all have these extraordinary experiences in roughly similar period of time, 71 to 75, or, around there. Something in about the early 70s sets this up. Leary has his own starseed transmissions as well. And there's a lot of other things, Lily, blah, blah, blah.
We should do like that's like the Mount Rushmore of the counterculture. We should build like a Mount Rushmore that's maybe somewhere on the road to Burning Man,
Wow,
it's like,
that's amazing.
Yeah. Wow. Anyways.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm just kind of going in there and looking at these crazy experiences they have, and I'm doing it not as a believer, not even as an ironist particular, but really someone who's like just trying to read it, read it the way you read a difficult poem. Like, how do you understand what's it going on? What's it drawing from? What are its contexts? What's inventive about it? What's new? What's not new? And so I'm using the kind of weird as a way into looking at things that otherwise you end up talking about them in other frameworks that I'm not as interested in. Like, I'm not interested in a purely materialist view where you're just like reducing them to their social conditions and showing how they're drawing from their own experiences and inventing things on the fly, because after all, this is all that cognition does. I do believe that in many ways. In many ways, I'm more on the side of a kind of constructivist view where we're sort of building reality out of the materials, historical, biological, physical that we have, rather than it coming down from some ulterior dimension. But I make room for the weird. I go, I don't know. It's an open-minded or an open-ended naturalism, a weird naturalism, which I also kind of talk about. And so it gives me a way into these things that is just really fruitful and fun. So I had a lot of fun just going through this. And then I'm a huge fan of the 70s. Like, for me, the 70s are just the most fascinating, rich decade. I love the music from the 70s, but I also find it the more I've thought about it, the more complex and nuanced and kind of dark the whole period gets. Not just on the surface where it's sort of, there's Watergate and the energy crisis, and there's obviously a lot of cheesiness in popular culture. There's a lot of paranoia. There's domestic terrorism. It's not the rosiest time. In some ways, it was probably one of the biggest bummer periods in American history, despite the richness of the art. Although a lot of the art is also kind of harrowing in some ways. But I came to recognize that this world we're in now, this insane reality undermining, postmodern, digitally driven, simulacral network, kind of mess that we're in, you can draw many of those tendrils back to the 1970s when the ARPANET begins, when consumer credit really begins, when the consumer system starts to develop that whole model of like, you give consumers credit in order to like satisfy their lifestyle needs and then they go on and kind of expand themselves. You have this growing pluralism in American society, which is cool if you're into multiculturalism. Yay, great. But it also goes along with a kind of erosion of tradition, of shared norms, and also produces this kind of multiplicity of kind of options. This kind of, there's just a smorgasbord of subjectivity positions I can consume and put together. And that's really, kind of cool in a lot of ways. But when you intensify it too much and when you throw in the sort of, the hit the truth's been taking in our current moment, then it all looks a little more ominous and confusing. So in the end, I actually see a lot of what these three characters were envisioning in their crazy visions as being in some ways, if not prophetic, then at least kind of allegorical or symptomatic of these larger shifts in culture and consciousness that in some ways lead to today.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, of course, Philip K. Dick is the prophet of alienation in a way, the alienated mindset. And this is jogging some thoughts. I've just been having conversations recently about, now I was born in 1981, but just looking at what was happening around that time in the end of the 70s, and then of course in the early 80s when there was suburbanization, there was the flooding because of the energy crisis, there was the flooding of the U.S. market with cheap cars from first Japan and then Korea, and that people got more and more siloed into their suburban bunkers, at least, the middle class did, and then there was white flight and all these things happened, and then people going into gated communities. Of course, this is the territory that Adam Curtis has so profitably mined throughout his documentary career.
Well said.
But and now it's even, as he's also pointed out, now it's to its ultimate extreme so far of alienation, where we're siloed not just physically but by information algorithms, and even the whole idea of economics is breaking down into the idea of blockchain and things like that. And it's amazing how on point Philip K. Dick really was about this. When you were talking about the trends that started in the 70s that are coming to fruition in a way now, one thing that struck me, that occurred to me, was Leary's whole idea of SMILE, space migration, intelligence increase, life extension. And one thing that I really wanted to ask you about, particularly since you're Bay Area based, is, and we're kind of having this conversation about the 70s, so many of these ideas that were, so many of these ideas that were counterculture ideas now really have become taken up, if not by the mainstream, then certainly by the tech industry. So everything from, private space travel to, we see the tech industry obsessing over this idea of mindfulness, whatever that actually means. We see, people like Elon Musk or the Google founders going to Burning Man. And of course, we see the massive, all of a sudden, mainstreaming of psychedelics. Rich white people have suddenly decided that drugs are okay, and even with who I saw you've had on your podcast, Michael Pollan. His work is massively mainstream. People like Joe Rogan, Jason Silva have just made it okay to be into psychedelics. And then we see even, kind of the old language of the human potential movement being turned into this real bro idea of hacking and biohacking by people like Tim Ferriss and Dave Asprey and people like that. And I really want to ask you about this because obviously your wheelhouse has kind of been the intersection of technology and religion. And I want to talk about the modern day and like where these things are at right now, because we're in this bizarre cultural moment where, like as you're talking about, like all these ideas that were once the province of, the weird, that were once the province of acid heads who like Led Zeppelin and, Steve Ditko comics and things like that, are now, mainstream.
Well, I mean, it's a very peculiar place for me personally. My first answer is really almost like my own personal identity, because I very much identified with the counterculture, even when I was in high school and had similar experiences to you, working in, I didn't work in a bookstore, but I haunted them, and just sort of absorbing all this material and being both fascinated and kind of like repulsed, but kind of like what's going on here, and I wanted to be exposed to all of it. That's
how it hooks you. It has to have the repulsion as part of how it addicts you.
Absolutely, that's well said. And then I went on and I went to an Ivy League, and then I was in New York City being a writer and, finding my own identity, but not so much my personal identity as like the world I wanted to speak about and speak in some sense for. And so I became a kind of like journalist of the weird in the late 80s, early 90s. I wrote about virtual reality. I wrote about weird heavy metal groups. I wrote about X-Files when it came out. I wrote about The Simpsons when it came out. I was kind of on this sort of beat of what I see now is all kind of leading to this broader idea. And I didn't just report on it. I was kind of into it. I had it was like participant observer. So, and then when I moved back from New York to California, it was partly about recovering or restoring or thinking of myself as a Californian. I'm a 5th generation Californian. I love history. I love psychogeography. I love the history of architecture. So for me, California is a very, very rich palimpsest, and it's a kind of wonderfully appropriate position to be deeply rooted in a rootless place, in a famously rootless place. And that tension is really important to me. And so for me, the underground, the counterculture, or the variety of subcultures which the counterculture splintered into in the 80s, which was actually another aspect of that siloing in the 80s, is that the counterculture becomes this myriad of subcultures doing their own little thing out in their own little feral underground over here, and like larvae or something, and so, but this was really a place for me to kind of balance myself. It's like I might be talking to the mainstream, or I might be writing, getting a PhD in the academy, or talking to scholars or whatever. But my core identity is that I'm whatever. I went to Burning Man. I saw the Grateful Dead when I was 14. I took a lot of acid in Southern California. I read those comics. I read the Rolling, whatever. I am that thing. And that was always sort of like a precious identity for me. It kind of gave me ballast, a sense of who I was in this postmodern craziness. And so now it's like these intimate kind of positions that enabled me to pretend that I was outside of the monster are fully incorporated into the monster. And it's very disorienting. I mean, it's kind of funny in the sense that now, like, people listen to me, like I have something to say, like there'll probably be more people who would read this book than if I published it 15 years ago when I could have written the same kind of book. I mean, I wouldn't have been as smart about it, but so it's kind of interesting to have a reflection on it, and to be able to be critical while sympathetic. And that's a problem, is that most of the voices, they're either in it or they're on the outside, like snarky New Yorkers, mocking it, and those two positions are kind of boring now. So I feel in that sense very privileged that I have a very sympathetic and very experiential understanding of this world, and the calls how hippies and technology and drugs and Buddhism and the esoteric all kind of come together in this wonderful place that kind of invented our dystopia. But I have the critical capacities to be like, this sucks, and I'm going to tell you why. And I don't do that too much in the book. I decided not to like.
What sucks? The mainstreaming of it?
No, not so much that is that you can see in the way in which things get appropriated, how they already had within them contradictions, illusions, narcissisms, things that at the time, maybe you could kind of give it a pass, at least if you were sympathetic like me. But now that it becomes absorbed, it's more clear the way that it was an insufficient thing in a way.
What's an example of that?
I think, I don't know, mindfulness might be, since you mentioned it before, what do people mean by it? So you have, all of these practices entering into a whole generation in the 60s and 70s. Of course, there's been Western Buddhists for centuries, but, it really explodes, takes off with Zen first, and then the Tibetans come in the 70s, and Vipassana comes in, which is a little bit less wacky and religious than either of those other modes. So there's different flavors for everybody. You like the high church, crazy psychedelic visions. Here's the Tibetan Buddhist. You like the spare kind of Protestant elite aesthetic, artsy avant-garde vibe. Zen is for you, baby. And if you want to just get down to brass tacks, don't worry about that stuff. Just get some tech and do your explorations. Vipassana. Way to go. So we got all this diversity already, but most of it is still, what touches the elite in certain ways. It gets mainstream already. It builds and builds and builds. already in the 90s, it was very visible how it was increasingly kind of middle class and sort of organized, and it lost its hairy edge. It wasn't, it was a little prim and proper, even kind of a boring way. I was probably doing a lot of Buddhist practice in the 90s, and there was a point in the early 2000s where I just stopped thinking about myself as a Buddhist, as an American Buddhist. I just didn't care anymore. I was sick of the discourse. I was sick of the psychologizing, the mainstreaming, the loss of the weirdness and whatever. So I just kind of bailed.
You killed the Buddha on the side of the road.
I tried, but then it just blows up. It blows up in more recent decades, and it's very complicated. And I was just reading a very harsh critique by this guy named Glenn Wallace, which was just a critique of Western Buddhism. And he's just like, no holds barred. It's mostly a philosophical critique, but he spends some time with the way in which it's been appropriated by capitalism, why it's been appropriated by capitalism, how well it serves both the overlords and the wage slaves.
Yeah. Now that's productive territory and uncomfortable territory, but that's where we should. That's where we need to go. Because that's what I'm seeing with the mindfulness thing, where it's suddenly mindfulness goes from, like you say, vipassana to be mindful on those spreadsheets, please, or mindful about those spreadsheets, and it also becomes a tool of making people more productive, but also pacifying them, making, along with the New Age movement, making them okay with, let's, say, the contradictions and abuses of late capitalism. It's like, just generate your own bliss, everything's fine.
Go with the flow,
be grateful.
Or, you can't control it. So just, and so that it's not even just pay attention to the spreadsheet. It's that the conditions we're living under, especially if you're in the working, we're kind of escaped slaves, but like if you're in that working world, there's so much pressure on you that Buddhism works. It works. It helps you chill out. It helps you not be depressed. It helps you be nicer to the people at work. And like all these things are good things. And yet when you have a systemic critique, when you look at it not at the level of the individual and you look at the big picture and you see the way that capitalism is not in its own terms for all of its brilliance. And I'm not like just a lumpen, Marxist or anything, but it in its own terms is not going to handle what lies ahead of us. It's just not. And the contradictions of it and the suffering inherent in it and the increasing concentration of wealth and all the stuff that I don't need to repeat here. It's clear the way that something like Buddhism translated into modern American mindfulness Buddhism, maybe it's not even Buddhism anymore, or it is, whatever, is helping maintain this kind of situation. So I don't know what to do with that. I don't know what to do with that as a practitioner.
Well, being aware of it, and talking about it is a big thing. And also, and of course we can add to that all of the, like you were touching on earlier, kind of the inherent contradictions that were there already, whether it's the, kind of feudal stuff that was in Tibetan Buddhism, or the views of women in a lot of these traditions. For instance, that women cannot be enlightened and must serve male monks until they can be so fortunate to be born in their next lifetime as a male, and then they can become enlightened. Wow, what a great deal, right? And then, of course, there's all the rampant Orientalism, starting with people like Theosophy and Lobsang Rampa and people like that about, the great ascended Tibetan masters. It's like, well, and as you point out, well, since the 70s, well, you can go meet them. There's lots of them here. They're people, it's like, so, but yeah, this is very worrying to me, the kind of co-option of spirituality by the machine as like, I guess another form of antidepressants in a way. It's kind of like as a way to pacify, the workers, right? Or to allow people to check out. And this is, of course, one of the big critiques of the 60s counterculture. And speaking with people who were there at the time, a lot of them have said to me, it's like, no, like, their view of people like Leary is not charitable, right? The idea that you look at these student revolution sweeping the world, and the massive and not just here, but in France in 1968 and in Mexico and all over Europe. And that suddenly that people were kind of talked into this idea of, oh no, the way to change the world is to go internal and tune in, turn on, drop out, take acid, meditate, and the proliferation of people like the Maharishi and transcendental meditation. And you can clearly, from a distance, I think, see that stuff as a pacifying force, and that it served power. In the same way, ironically, now we see people like, after I've mentioned a few times with people, up to the Trump administration and the second half of the Obama administration, I think the powers that be were so frightened by WikiLeaks, Edward Snowden, Standing Rock, the massive sudden, power that people had because of electronic media. And I don't think it's a mistake that the next thing that happens is this engineered conservative or traditionalist backlash. And it's fascinating to see the same kind of dynamic playing out with people like Jordan Peterson, who's not saying drop acid and meditate, but he's saying, oh, clean your room, focus only on yourself. Don't protest, be a responsible member of society, sort yourself out before you can, you need to sort yourself out before you can critique society. Well, you and I both know that process never ends. And by the time you've done 20 years of Buddhist meditation, you can't be bothered leaving the house to protest. It's like, I need to take a nap, like True Detective's on.
Yeah,
I haven't cleaned the dishes. I can't be bothered.
Yeah, no, it's a tough one because, and I'm saying this as like, for me, a further comment on my confusion, and confusion not in the sense like, oh, I just don't know what to think about it, but I have a lot of ideas, but it's more that I think we're in part of the character of our moment is that we're fundamentally vexed, and that there's multiple things pulling on us in different directions, because part of the trick, part of the reason this serves power is not just, oh, it's just bad ideology, and I have some critiques with the critiques that have to do with what I think is a kind of ultimately sort of narrow view of what reality is, and that I am in a body, I am personally going to die. I do have relations. I have relations with nature, with animals. And I don't believe that neoliberalism is an absolute totalizing force that maintains its power over every little tiny facet of reality. It might want to. In fact, I think there's some good reason to say that it does want to, and that it's doing that process. But until that happens, I have to kind of live in multiple worlds. And in one of those worlds, it's really important for me, for example, to take a leaf of stoicism from, not from Jordan Peterson, but the kind of thing that he's referring to, and keep my room clean. When I meet rabble-rousing, angry people who can't keep their shit together, I'm like, you can't keep your shit together, man. I'm okay. Oh, you're pissed off. Yes, the world sucks. There's a lot of evil people who are oppressing other people or whatever. But, so we're in this bind where we kind of do have to attend to our internal world to some degree. There is an internal world that, if nurtured, unfolds and seems to bring one into capacities of connection with other people, with nature, with the cosmos, with past, that are remarkable and seem productive. And yet, the minute we lose our critical edge or our capacity to move between worlds, then we're in a box, we're in a cage, and it's great. Go ahead, get enlightened. It's awesome, but you're staying in your little zone, but it's not like we can just ignore the zone. So when I'm around people who are super political, very concerned about solidarity and this and that, I often find myself kind of alienated because I don't work that way. I relate more with individuals who are singularities. I'm just not that guy. I can't really do it very well. So then, is that because I am so deeply stained by the ideology of the individual that I can't do that anymore? And so I'm a part of the problem. And I don't know about that. I think it's more that we're in this situation where reality is multiple. It's not that this is the truth and there's all these falsehoods It's like the whole thing is like engendering itself in multiple dimensions, and we're kind of stuck between them, trying to move between with different value sets, because sometimes different value sets have to change in order to be appropriate, the way we have different language, you talk to different people. So that's what I mean by the confusion isn't like, oh, I'm just confused. It just feels like to make decisions, to have an identity, to even if it's just a functional identity, is to be in this state where different realities are kind of pulling at us.
I think one of the most, that perfectly sums up so many things. One of the most useful things that I took from my time reading people like Robert Anton Wilson, and definitely Buddhism, the idea of that there's no fundamental self, is the idea of developing the ability to switch values, switch reality tunnels, switch personalities, and at least be able to see reality from different perspectives. And that, I think, is something that people have completely lost and have become completely rigid, maybe out of fear of dealing with this multiplicitous world that you're talking about. It's kind of like, as anyone who's ever meditated or done psychedelics can tell you, that when somebody is confronted by a lot of new information, like they're tripping, they can seize up and it becomes a really bad trip. And then those who are able to, they seize up and cling to their ego, cling to their identity, and it doesn't go well for them. And then those who are able to relinquish into the void, as it were, or at least be able to open to multiple perspectives, have a much better time of it. And that, I think, is the most is a great gift of all of these ideas and traditions, and it's something that's allowed me to be, I feel, at home in this weird world that we're in now, and perhaps more psychologically healthy. Whereas if I was still clinging to this, as you see people now going back to this neo-reactionary or traditionalist idea, clinging with all their might, with white knuckles, pun intended, to something that probably never existed, because that's who that's their last shred of what they think reality is.
Well, here's a question for you. This is one that I wrestle with a lot, because I feel similar in some ways to this situation, or I can relate with it. Is that it seems clear to me that being able to move between worlds in that Robert Anton Wilson way, or to have a certain kind of proactive relativism and being able to talk to different people and to see how reality is kind of composed of all these different perspectives, and that it's good to be. So I think that's an extraordinary survival strategy, and even a strategy of health that enables people at least people who are paying attention, to sort of take on as much as you can, or at least, exist within this reality without holding back in our current moment. But what I wonder is, how does it become, and this is the kind of political question, this is the person, and I respect this question, who's saying, great guys, wonderful. You have the privilege to be able to like hop between worlds and, be groovy and, go to Burning Man and then go, and then do your politics and this and that. But that's not going to cut it. That's not going to do it, because it's already too postmodern. I don't think postmodern is the right word to refer to that kind of pluralism. I think it's sort of a pluralism which is almost ontological, like there's multiple worlds and we're moving between them. But there's not a great answer to either how do we form the solidarity we need to actually, respond to the environmental crisis, respond to the social crisis, et cetera, et cetera. And I do believe we need that solidarity or some form of it. But also, this is almost a kind of a trickier one. How do we, where do our values come from? That's the question. Where do your values come from? You seem like a good guy. I've met some, people who are multiplicitous in the way that we're talking about. Don't seem like such great guys. I've seen people, because you can use that logic to justify tons of stuff. And that's where more conservative people are really threatened by people like us, because they're like, no, there's no absolute, there's no truth, there's no morals. You're just postmodern relativists. You're just a nihilist. And so, and I'll end and then let you, I really want to hear your response here. Something very profound happened. I didn't play D&D very much. I played it a little bit. I wish I'd played it more, but my friend, we were already into doing drugs. So it was just more fun to get, whatever. We didn't need the books. Yeah. Anyway, I was already but I did play, and the thing that I loved was the moral. What do they call it? Moral alignment you get, and it's like it was so obvious to me, even when I was like 14 years old, that I was chaotic good. It was so clear. I was like, oh, I'm chaotic good. Yeah, sure. And then like sometimes I get in really like philosophical arguments with people, and I realized the best way to say my position is to go, well, it's kind of like D&D. I'm kind of like chaotic good, and. But what is that? Is that just my temperament? Is it my family? Is it where does it come? Where do we still have the values that enable us to be compassionate, to be looking for truth, to be hoping for a better world, to not getting caught up in the narcissism or the story that capitalism wants to tell us about how we can be realized selves or whatever, even though we can recognize that there's values to these various perspectives?
Well, you mentioned, since we're talking about the, Dungeons and Dragons in the late 70s, I have to share this. And also you mentioned how conservative people are in many cases, I think quite rightly threatened by, this kind of people being the stereotypical, no values, no morals, no mooring, no center, just whatever. Because, having been around a lot of people like that in my life, I, do not want. Right. It's like that is the pathway to dissolution in the abyss and your life falling apart. So it's just, and there's no benefit to it other than to see it, experience it and go, okay, that's not for me. At least in my case, maybe it's different for other people. But I often tell friends of mine that, particularly living in California and being around weird scenes, I sometimes enter the I enter the trance of Jack Chickapati in Polly, which is where I suddenly understand. I have this trance where I understand that that my surroundings are literally a Jack Chick tract, and that it's like, and that if somebody from, let's say, Kansas or Memphis, Tennessee, were to view wherever I happen to be, whether it's like some, warehouse rave or, just neo-pagan people or things like that, it would literally seem like a Jack Chick track to them. Like, people sitting around doing drugs, talking about the occult. It's just like, I'm living in a Jack Chick track, and anytime you're in a situation where people are wearing robes or dressed as druids, which thank God never happens to me that much anymore, but it used to a lot. It's like suddenly the trance of Jack Chickapati begins. It is not comfortable. It's like, oh my God, I'm a living caricature. Like, what am I? Am I like, somebody would see me as like some agent of Satan here to like undermine Christian values or something like that? Like, what if that is what I am? Oh God. But yes, this has actually caused some profound moments of soul searching many times in my life.
I can hear it. No, I have definitely. I can taste that. I even think that that's in a way part of what Bohemia is that Bohemia is the willingness to celebrate and play with creating situations that, if you really take them seriously in their expression or their appearance, are demonic. Or whatever. I don't want demonic, not like demons, but like are like whatever, infernal. That they have. Oh, that's a bit much. Like I've gone too far now. There's a too farness in the picture, and if that's not there, then it's just simple hedonism, which is not very interesting to me. Like hedonism, to my mind, gains value the more risk it has, but some of the risks that it's running are much worse than just conventional hedonism. And that's the kind of edge of danger that I think was really helped characterize, in some ways, the existential value of a lot of countercultural experiences up to a certain point. So I could talk about early Burning Man in those terms. Early Burning Man, there was danger, actual threat. You could die. People died. You could burn, you get burned. Oh, there's a fire. Oh shit, got burned. Oh, well, this kind of stuff happened. And then there's sort of a more cultural form of that. Like how far, what is your edge? What does it mean when you have your edge and psychedelics and guns and, it's a weird place, and it was not safe. It didn't feel safe. And then what it becomes is this increasingly like very hedonistic, safe environment for a kind of indulgence in a sort of circulated idea of the edge. I don't want to say there is still awesome stuff out there, and there was some terrible stuff back there, and cheesiness and insular dumps, whatever. It's not. I'm not like, oh, it was so great back then, but it was different, and that difference, I think, is something that's actually happened to counterculture in a way, and that part of what makes our contemporary moment difficult is that while in some sense those weird scenes continue, once they're Instagrammed, once they're part of the circulation, then they're really banal. So it's like we're in a different kind. Hannah Arendt talked about the banality of evil. I'm not talking about that kind of evil. She was talking about the evil of like killing people in a systematic basis during the Holocaust. I mean this other kind of like bohemian aesthetic evil, this sort of excess of craziness and cutting the edge. That is like utterly banal. So what do we do with this stuff? How do we like come? We come from what we've come from. There's no way out. We're not going to be reactionary and turn against it. We can see the limits of it with the esoteric or the way Buddhism. What do we do now? What do we do with this stuff? Is there still room for a new magic that's not just like chaos magic, that's actually synthesizing these things and somehow engaging with a contemporary world without losing that yumminess, like without becoming bland and too psychological,
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, I think that these are like, at least in my life, it's been productive for me to think of these things in a couple ways. One is just as learning stages, right? And both on an individual level and at a cultural level. And you're talking about this time, early Burning Man and for me, I didn't make it to Burning Man until I think 2008. But for me in the late 90s and the 2000s, like the chaos magic scene or joining kind of secret societies, it's like that was a crazy place. Like that was an unsafe place. There was insanity going on there. Like it was truly the wrong side of the tracks. And even though I had so many hair-raising experiences at the time, like I really have a sense of nostalgia for it. And I actually was talking about this with Stephen Flowers, and it's not so, I mean, yes, all that stuff is still there. You can still go get into these occult things, but the value there was that you had actually found some type of egress completely outside of the spectacle. Right. And all that stuff, of course, now has been fully recapitulated and regurgitated, dozens and dozens and dozens of times by the spectacle. And there's no charge to it at all anymore. Even in the classic Freudian sense, the value of a taboo is that it is taboo and it has that charge. Once you reveal once you reveal it, it's in a Nine Inch Nails video or, like a magic, you reveal the symbol, you reveal the pinnacle. Well, now the charge is gone. The reason it has a charge is because it's forbidden and it's hidden. And so when you find it, it has that incredible like frisson of like, this is, I finally found something that is truly beyond the pale. And now that's pretty much gone. But I think that in answer to your question, it's an old model, it's not a perfect model, and I do have my issues with it. But I think actually spiral dynamics has some interesting things to say about what we're talking about. Yellow. I don't want to get too much into spiral dynamics jargon because it just gets too jargony. But understanding that these levels of culture, whether it's conservative thinking or then ecological thinking and then systems-based thinking, like what we're talking about, being able to see how everything fits together, that these are stages of how cultures progress. And I recently learned, I had always thought that spiral dynamics was kind of a fringe idea that was, people like Ken Wilber wrote about it and people like us knew about it. But I recently learned that Nelson Mandela actually used spiral dynamics as the way to structure the, when he became president of South Africa, he used spiral dynamics as the model to put the country together, which is amazing, right? Because it is fascinating. This blew my mind because he had come from a world where people were seeing each other as their skin color, right? And he'd been in prison for decades thinking, okay, either I'm going to die or if I get out of here, I've got to be a leader. So what do I do? And the answer he came up with was he was using spiral dynamics. And so he had people seeing each other as different spiral dynamics colors. Like, oh, you're a green meme, like you're a hippie, or you're a blue meme, you're an authoritarian. And so now they were using this idea of relating on a color level, but it was ideological color. And using this, he restructured South Africa. This was fascinating for me to learn. So I think that there's a lot to look at there. And I think first and foremost, we do need to get into the first and foremost, not just the counterculture, not just the counterculture, which is really a misnomer now. It just doesn't, it's been recapitulated. It doesn't exist anymore. And in anything other than nostalgia and these ideas that are still very potent, right? That are still there. But as an identity, it's nostalgia at this point. But I think that what we do need as a culture is just to get, past the, I think that we're very clearly, as Ken Wilber properly diagnosed, we're in this moment of progressing from the green meme of everyone's view counts and there's no hierarchies to reintegrating hierarchy in the sense of understanding how all systems in the world function together. And again, I don't want to go too down the spiral dynamics rabbit hole because because for people who don't know what it is, it's just going to sound like jargon. But we do need to get to right now as a culture, I think we're going crazy a bit because we're in this cultural landscape of multiplicity, and you can see things with the resurgence of the right, of people violently regressing to get away from it. But we have to go forward. We have to understand how everything in the world functions together as a whole system so that we understand the natural integration of everything, and how, let's just make this simple, how people can have different views and coexist, and that those views might be complementary and it might be necessary for everyone to have different viewpoints, and different people might have different functions in society without it being compulsory or hierarchical. It's just certain people see reality and have different talents than other people, and we need to see that from an integral and an integrated viewpoint. We just need to be okay with the fact that we're all different and learn how to work together without trying to come up with these totalizing or just descending into social media violence.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very. I could say the word pessimistic, but I would say I'll speak more personally and say I'm very saddened, exhausted, confused. I don't see. I've always been that person. Like I've always, even with my kind of countercultural bona fides, I like to go. I'm happy to talk to a conservative Christian if they're nice. I don't function that way. Yes, in a way, I'm privileged. I'm a straight white male. I have means or whatever. So I realize that I don't have to carry a certain kind of burden. Nonetheless, I could still be a jerk, but I'm not. And I've always sort of functioned that way and been interested in how difference gets articulated and wanted to support and nurture it. And I always felt that was part of what it meant to be a countercultural intellectual, or somebody who was invested in the mind as well as in culture. And so it just always seemed kind of like almost like that's the given, but it's so gone. And that's where when I talked earlier, I want to be clear about the alienation I feel from some people on the left is my values are still pretty progressive along those lines in terms of how to wield the engine of capital and distribute its goods in different ways. But the problem I have is that while it's much more fierce on the right, you still have this kind of closing up shop, kind of like we're just this now and they're them, and you're either with us or against us kind of thing. And I can't do that. And I feel like this is the weird part, that at the same time, I'm deeply alienated from our moment. I feel very vulnerable because I feel like if even like in this kind of context, I'm like, oh, if I say the wrong thing, then I'm going to get that or whatever. And I'm going to have to handle that in the internet land. But much worse than that is that I feel like my sensibility is what helps us get through this situation. Like people like me, not like I'm a leader, but just like the sensibility, like I feel like I'm keeping this light of like a healthy multiplicity, not anything goes multiplicity. And that's part of the problem, I think, is that I very much resonate with what you said about a learning process. And I think one of the great problems, and it's just nobody does this, is it's very clear to me that if you're talking about spiritual worldviews, if you're talking about attitudes towards the other, attitudes towards hedonism or whatever, that most people, I think, if allowed to do so, go through these stages and they get out of these stages. And if you're going into a stage, don't worry about it too much. I mean, if there's something excessive or you really got to do it or they're really going off the rails, yeah, you might need to do an intervention. But it seems like a lot of people kind of go through things, and some people do get stuck. That sucks. But I don't really see another way out. But it has a philosophical aspect as well. There was a point in the study of Plato that they came to, they were like, okay, one guy wrote all these things. And we know that one guy wrote these things. It was this guy. And they're kind of contradictory. I mean, they're pretty contradictory sometimes for a philosopher. In fact, sometimes they seem to be saying almost exactly the opposite kind of thing. And then what people started to realize, and is now kind of accepted, is that the texts themselves were like stages of an education process.
Ah, that's interesting.
And one of the first things you learn is kind of disgust with the world, with the way things are. You get real dark. You're trapped. There's no way out. You want to have sex? It's disgusting. So you get this ascetic, negative view that's represented, I'm kind of parodying it in some ways, but in some texts. But the whole point is to like break you out of your kind of natural state or your given acculturated state so that you're like shocked. And then you're ready to learn higher levels, at the top of which are much more integral views where the body's in there and everything's in there. And it's much more, integral in the kind of modern sense. And I think that that's true of a lot of spiritual positions. It's like, it's important to spend some time as a paranoid Gnostic. But if you get stuck, it's just a bummer for you and everybody else, and there's reasons that it's wrong. I mean, there's reasons to not believe a lot of conspiracy theories. Doesn't mean we don't go into them and see what happens. And, oh my God, the world is like, we some of us are called to enter into these modes, but the stickiness of them is what to me seems the problem. And they seem increasingly sticky. I mean, I don't know about you, but I mean, I just like somebody sent me a link to a website that was put together by someone was in my circle. We weren't like close friends, but, we were hanging out, whatever. Didn't have too many deep conversations, but a good guy, whatever. And it was total off the rails ufology. I mean, like, whoa. And then another person who was like a groovy hippie, really beautiful, like older lady who was like real soul, like real earthy, like she's real stable, actually, real stable part of the community, kind of a lot of people around her. And she was like, all QAnon. Oh, God. She got into QAnon, and and you're like, what the, and so you're like, oh God, it's not like. Anyway, so the stickiness of the situation, and I just don't know what do we do other than just keep having these conversations, Jason?
Well, I think having these conversations and being visible, it's like, hello, there's still sanity, but yeah, I mean, even just on the conspiracy tip, just remember, just reading Robert Anton Wilson, like, wow, this is a fun game to play, like Illuminatus, like, oh, this is so, yeah, it's kind of crazy. It's a little paranoid, but it's like kind of in this endearing, like Austin, Texas kind of way, like, oh, like, like being into conspiracy theories. It was like collecting conspiracy theories was like collecting records or collecting baseball cards or something like that, like finding out new stuff. And then, but it was like, it always with this Robert Anton Wilson thing, it had this like kind of like positive hippie kooky vibe. But then like, we got David Icke, who was completely bad trip zone, like this is totally real and happening and lizard people are everywhere. It's just like bad trips are us. And then now, and it became totally serious and it completely lost the distance. Where with Robert Anton Wilson, it was always, the distance was always there. Like, oh, this is fun to play with. Like, isn't this interesting? And it went from there to this is true and literally happening. And like you said, the Gnostic, locked in Gnostic paranoia. And now, frankly, you look at like conspiracy stuff online, they're all Nazis now. Like the alt-right has like paved over and colonized all of that stuff. And it was really instructive. I've talked to a few people about this. It was very instructive to see all these people who had kind of Gnostic or conspiracy blogs or podcasts almost overnight went hardcore alt-right, anti-Semitic. Red Ice Radio is a good example. They used to do kind of like crazy Gnostic stuff, and now it's all Nazism. And it happened almost overnight, almost as if it was either, I don't necessarily want to say it was coordinated, or just people are that gullible and went for the new thing. Like that was the new cultural thing. And for that reason, I'm just like, look, I don't want to have anything to do with any of this anymore. It's like, I don't want to have anything to do with conspiracy stuff or even a lot of the occult world, because a ton of occult people just went down that rabbit hole. It's like, look, like the whole, it's just like, I don't want to be, I don't want to even be around this stuff. So I think that, but to talk about the positive, and I think at least let me think, the conclusion that I've come to is, just putting like having conversations like this. I really think that, podcasting is a great leveling. As much negative stuff as there is on the internet, podcasting brings back long form communication and conversations almost in a way that wasn't even really happening before the internet. So I think that, just for me at least, completely dropping the edgelord front and just being like, look, this is me, I'm human, I don't know, but let's talk. Can we communicate? Like, let me just be honest about what I'm feeling and what I'm going through, and just not doing the kitschy edgelord thing at all.
Well, I want to ask you about that. Just like what happened in your life that enabled you to make that transition? Because that's something that people can get stuck in. Like when you were younger, you were in this crazier scene. There's a lot of energy. You're full of, piss and vinegar. And then you realize you can sort of craft personas that then craft other people's view of you, and you can sort of start to play with reality. And my earlier impressions of you was someone like, oh, he's like a really smart, edge walker who's like pushing it, and like it's kind of a little too much for me. I don't know if I'd want to go to a party with him, but like I'm glad he's there, because I like that. I like characters. So I could tell you were a character. You weren't a sort of generic mage, postmodern mage. You were like doing something, but you also were, full of yourself or whatever. You had this kind of edge. And the person I'm meeting now is really, deep and interesting and level, but also able to dip in those waters and be informed by the weird experiences you and I have had. I mean, we can't get out of those things. Was it a gradual evolution? Was it something happen in your life? Was it a cognitive insight? Was it, and I say that because I'm interested in how people go through those worlds and then come out of them without, not like a diametric break, but how they evolve, if you will, in different direction.
Man, well, let me think about this. I think that we're similar in a lot of ways, I think, just having this conversation with you and the one we had previously. And I think that one of the similarities is that when I went into that world in the first place, I was doing it from a position of ironic distance. It was like, I was, a writer and a journalist, and I went into the world of the occult as, oh, this is an interesting subject to write about. And like, oh, like as the thing that journalists do, like, okay, check out this subculture, and I'm going to curate this subculture for you. And I'm going to be the guy who's kind of like, I show you this, but I'm not like, but I can still have a toe in the cynical, sarcastic New York world of kind of, one hand in and one eyebrow up, as it were, but particularly,
good eyebrow.
Thank you. And so it was, and it definitely was from this, when I going into it, it was from this kind of agitprop way, or, it was very consciously like, wanting to be at, wanting to be punk about it and wanting to, just listening to Atari Teenage Riot nonstop, when I was doing that stuff. So, and wanting to, push the boundary, because I was in my early 20s, and that's what, guys in their early 20s want to do a lot of the times. And then particularly after Generation Hex came out, after my first book came out, the line began to blur. And I think this happens with a lot of creative people, where it was like all of a sudden people saw me as that. They weren't responding to me as if I was John Ronson. Right. They were responding to me as if I was Marilyn Manson. So, they weren't seeing the, I mean, clearly, you were, well, a lot of people who were, were picking up on that could see the irony or the ironic distance. But the broad majority of people were just like, whoa, like, totally taking it on in full. And so as people began to react to me as if I was that character that I built, which I think is something that happens to musicians a lot. It's like I created this character intentionally, and then people reacted to me as if I was that person. And so the line began to blur. But I never totally what I think, okay, if I'm going to be completely honest, I think that I never totally lost that line. And when the line began to blur and I began to lose my balance, and particularly maybe around 24, 25, it's like, whoa, like I'm surrounded by people using hard drugs. I'm surrounded by people who are just, Satanist burnouts. And this is not fun anymore. And it's kind of like I breached past the kitsch barrier, right? But at the same time, that doesn't mean that I was insincere, because I believe then, and I still believe now, that all this stuff is critically important, right? It's just that there was at the time all this subcultural baggage that was not productive. And so, that kind of was I spent many years in my late 20s where my life had pretty much fallen apart. And I put myself back together through, that's, I think, when the glamour wore off, like the edgy stuff, the chaos magic, the drugs, the hedonism, the, getting girls to pay attention to me, because suddenly I'd gone from this, acneed English major D&D nerd to like the dark shaman of the apocalypse, like overnight. And I was like, whoa, I'm getting attention, and that was very disorienting. And because that's who I was, and suddenly I became this character that I'd invented. But a lot of the world that I was in now just didn't sit right. I could just see the edge of self-destruction. I could see it didn't feel comfortable. I could see losing myself really easily. And for me, the idea of getting trapped as that person was really, really frightening. And so I really pulled back. And I think for me, without being, I don't know, a little ham-handed about this, I think that for me, that's when a sense of real spirituality and real spiritual practice began for me, because then it wasn't about, okay, I'd gone through that. It wasn't about putting up a front. It was just about, how do I be a healthy, happy, sane human being? And so it took me a long time to get out of that. And I think that
it's funny. I just got to put input just how much our ordinary suffering as human beings is really the crucible of so much real growth. And it's just true. And it sounds like kind of a little cliche to say it, but I know that's true in my case. I mean, I think I avoided, not just a fate, but like that whole character thing, because I was always, I don't know, I think I had a certain model of a kind of scholar that was sort of distanced by nature, but I loved being that curator of subcultures, especially in my journalism in the 90s, and the hip cat. I definitely wanted to be hip. I want to be very fucking hip. But like also like I'm hip, so I still get the good grades. It's like I feel sometimes like I my whole life was set in motion by the following tacit agreement between my parents and me in high school, which is that I could hang out with disreputable individuals, go away for the entire weekend, have long hair, have pictures of unhealthy rock stars and hot girls plastered all over my room, which was filled with weird occult objects, if I continue to get good grades. So I'm like, so that was always the deal in a way. And so like, even when I was in the, like these kind of groovy subcultures, it was like, there was still a part of me that was like, but I'm still kind of like being I'm sort of an anthropologist here. So it's got that ironic distance that you talk about, but also a kind of like a commitment. I had some kind of commitment to a larger view or a larger discourse that I was probably half in my own head, but it kept me from that category. But like a lot of people, I've many people in my life who told me like, dude, if you wanted to start a religion, like you'd be great. Like I give a charismatic speaker, I can bring all these things together. I'm kind of delightful, but I'm, I still seem kind of heavy, or like, well, there's this gravitas or something. It's like, you got it made, boy. And that was always like the must to avoid. It was like nothing that smacks of that. Like in any situation where I'm giving myself more authority to speak, then I have to undermine it even more with self-mockery or humor or whatever. And that's just like the modus,
This is very Gen X position in a way,
Totally. I'm very, very generational that way. And I'm okay with it. Like, you're very right to point that out. But, I said, even though we've been talking for a while, I wanted to read a response to our conversation that we had on expanding mind.
Can I wrap? I wanted to, before we lose the thread of this, I wanted to add one thing, just because it touches on the generational thing and what you mentioned about what was it that shifted this. And honestly, the economic crash, right? 2008. And I was born in 81. So I'm kind of in this weird gray zone between Gen X and millennial. So I'm not exactly a millennial, but I'm kind of like there with them in a way. And when the economic crash happened, it was just like, okay, there's no time for this anymore. There's just not time. Like, okay, just like, so sober the fuck up. Like, you got to eat. You have to figure out some way to get food on the table. Like, this shit is real. It's like, snap the fuck out of like all, like, it was like overnight, all of that stuff, the 90s counterculture and anything edgelordy, it's just like, we don't have time for that anymore. And it's like, I was talking to Duncan Trussell about this. It's like the whole thing he was talking about comedians being edgelords in the 90s. And I was like, well, the thing about being an edgelord now is you're trying to shock traumatized people. Because the whole point of the edgelord position is, when done right, is this kind of Gurdjieffian thing of shocking the normies out of their cultural trance. It's like, they're freaking traumatized. They're on the couch staring at the TV because they're so afraid of everything that's going on. They've had to deal with the economic crash. They've had to deal with Trump. They've had to deal with, people are going through losing medical care, not being able to afford their insulin shots. It's like, of what value is trying to shock people like that? It's pointless. So for me, it's interesting you mentioned, trying to get away from being an authority figure. But for me, I was trying to get away from that for so long. I just wanted to be anonymous. I wanted to be like a nameless, faceless person, and I couldn't. And and I realized that it was also an ego position for me to be like, oh, well, I'm not going to share everything that I know with people because they're not ready for it. And, it's too dangerous for them. It's like, well, no, it's like, what's the point of me learning all this stuff if I can't make something productive out of it? And so really the only thing that I care about right now, like, I don't care about any of the edgelord stuff. I don't care about making myself significant. I don't care about any type of, subcultural elitism. For me, and kind of, it was always this way for me, but it's taken me a long time to clarify it and hone down on it. It's just, okay, out of all this stuff, what actually works? What can actually reduce human suffering? What can actually make life better for people? Okay, well, let's hone down on that and deliver it. Because from my perspective, if I can't deliver, then what is the point of all of this? It's like, either I can deliver something that helps or I can't. Either I'm useful or I'm not. And I think that's a perspective that is also a generational perspective, in that it's a bit more millennial And it was just honed in the economic crash.
That's fascinating. That's an inspiring comment, but it does set up the letter. So this is from my friend Brian, and he heard our show that I just posted a week ago. That was a lot of fun. I got to find it. That the Jason Louv show is just a dense hunk of chocolate cake I was hoping for when I initially inquired as to whether you'd read The Empire of Angels or not. He was the one that got me to read it again. I mean, I'd wanted to read it, but he was like, come on, do it. So good from both ends of the conversation. I've listened to several interviews with him, It's nice to hear a thoughtful discussion of Uncle Al that isn't drenched in tacky Typhonian butter kisses or self-centered moral dismissal.
I love that.
Keeping that fella's well-fed poop compartmentalized is no small task, and you all landed it as well as one could hope. But now the question remains, and this is why I'm reading this. How do we build a Western esoteric practice that isn't as flimsy as chaos magic can all too often be, but also isn't dropping you right in the middle of the Book of Revelations and making you pick sides between two equally problematic mountain gods? How do you take the brain change technology of the Golden Dawn and the AA with the pursuit for the highest evolved self, but design it outside of a system whose entire phone book was written thousands of years ago? Is it inhibiting these energies similar to how Santeria practitioners use the interface of Catholic saints for their work, or is it building something wholly and completely new and different?
Wow. Well, that's a great comment. Man. Okay. Well,
I know it's a tough. I mean, we've been doing tough questions the whole conversation, and for me, it's about. I'll start off with to let you think too. I think a lot about magic because I often felt like a poser in magic scenes, even though I've been in orders and done rituals and stuff. Not nearly as much as you have, but I've also been friends with magicians forever. I love being friends with people who do magic practitioners. And I was, I'm kind of a poser, I'm more of a contemplative, more of a Buddhist guy. I just like the, kind of contemplation. I'm not so into the will thing. I don't know what that means, blah, blah, blah. So I had all these issues about it. But really, I realized that if I boil it down, it's like, what do you do with the supplement that is enchantment, that extra fizz that you can't really locate in a rational, reasonable, even psychologically integral approach to reality. There's this kind of excess, and you can go through elaborate mechanisms to stage it and form it. Or, and this is sort of where I find myself, you just kind of melt it into the everyday. I mean, now my everyday isn't the same as some other people's everyday. As I said, I'm an escaped slave, but I find that magic and enchantment is so intimate to just the ordinary features of the day. And in that way, it really dovetails with some of what is best in Buddhism or most pragmatic in Buddhism, but not just pragmatic, because if it's just pragmatic, it's just more of the same, get the self, get ahead kind of stuff. It's got to be pragmatic plus, like realist plus. And that plus is still worth working with, invoking, believing in, even if necessary, to keep it going, not just being ironic about. And we can see that in these older systems, but I'm not so sure. I don't know how to make it happen. It's almost like I can see it happening in the fabric of the everyday. But that's my stab.
Well, it's got to be in the fabric of the everyday. I think it has to be, right? It's like, because it's like, look, we've got the internet now, all right? Like, people can't be fooled by these claims people used to make in magic books. It's like people can't just like pick up a Kenneth Grant book and be like, whoa, like there must be. Yeah, I'm sure you remember that up to the era of social media, you could still do this thing of picking up an occult book and imagining in your head like, wow, what this person must be like. They must live in like a castle in Prague and do secret rituals and be part of some Eyes Wide Shut. And it's like, now that doesn't happen, because now you just go to their social media page and you say, oh, well, they work in IT in the Midwest, and they have like Pepe alt-right memes all over their page, and they're sharing anti-vaxxer things and InfoWars stuff. And it's like, all right, spelled So this is really instructive, by the way, in understanding. It's like you all these fearsome occult people, you can go to their Facebook page, you will be shocked. So, but I think that, I mean, look, not to self-plug, but, I'm working on it with every waking moment, it's like, and I have been for a long time now, and it's not a small project. In terms of revitalizing the Western tradition, there's so much there technology-wise, and there's so much there to wade through in terms of people's personalities and history and cultural context, and the fact that so much was written in Twilight language, and then there's the whole idea of adapting it for people where people are at. I'm working my ass off on it. A lot of it has already been manifested at magic.me, and honestly, John Dee and the Empire of Angels was a work to recontextualize the whole thing. And one of the main reasons why I wrote that book was to show that there is a continuous tradition, and to also simultaneously kind of judo flip Crowley.
Yeah.
Right. In the sense that his personality has his personality has had such a pull of gravity. And I mean that either with people not just with people who are dogmatic Thelemites, but people who are reacting against him. It's like even me, in a sense, it's like I have to like deal with him and react against him. But so I think that the first step is showing the tradition, showing that there actually is a tradition. I think that is very critically important, because a lot of what's happened is that, particularly since chaos magic, is that people have just been able to make up their version of it and say, this is it. But, well, look, JSTOR's free. It's on the internet. We have so much better academic resources to actually look at what the reality of these things is, instead of filling in the dots with conjecture. You said it as kind of a throw. Me, like, that's the freaking point of this. Right? It's like, if you can, like, magic, like, don't worry about crystals and dragons and airbrush stuff and the glamour. It's like, if you can free yourself from being a debt slave in modern America or wherever it happens to be, and just being shackled to this consumerist nightmare, and gaining some degree of personal autonomy, like, then success, right? That's what we want. And then from there, you can work at sharing how you did that with other people. And I think that, but to make it really simple, it comes down to two questions, right? And in terms of whether it's revitalizing the Western magical tradition or any spiritual tradition, right? Any consciousness change thing. The first is a question that you need to constantly ask yourself, and I mean anyone who's engaged in this, is, how do I see other people? Right. And this is always a classic test of enlightenment, right? Somebody who claims to be enlightened, you ask them, what are other people? And a lot of times you'll get answers like, oh, they're the sleepers, they're the unawakened, or they're just there, they're consumers, it's like, so it's like, and I feel that if you end up in a position where other people seem, if you have anything less than total compassion for the humanity and vulnerability and suffering of other people, while simultaneously understanding that they're not victims, they're people just like you, and they're just as inherently divine as you. Anytime you're in some magical change paradigm, and you end up slipping into this place of thinking that it makes you more significant or more elite than other people, then you've slipped. Right, you've slipped off the path. And that dovetails with the second question, which is, what can actually help people, right, out of all this stuff? Because it's so easy for people to disappear up their own assholes, right, and just read every book and do all the gematria, and, like you said, the Kenneth Grant, pastry confection, and whatever that is, they're just like up the asshole of Cthulhu, or just become, endlessly armchair, or just become obsessed. Then the other thing you see is people just becoming obsessed with collecting grades, or getting the accolades of people, or becoming significant online. It's all bullshit. All of it, right? And even the ideologies and the practices don't really matter. The only thing that matters, at least in my way of thinking is, what if this can actually help people? Like, what can actually ease human suffering? What can, like you said, what can we do to show people that there is a hopeful view to see the world? What can we do to show people that they can escape from being slaves, whether that's slaves physically or slaves of the mind? Or what can we do, even frankly, literally, tangibly, to solve some of the serious issues in this world, like literal human trafficking or literal, it's like, okay, if you have so much magic power, then what are you going to do about human trafficking? Right? Like, what are you going to do? Right? Let's see. There's so many, in fantasy books and grimoires and movies and stuff like this, wizards are always, dueling dragons and evil nemesis and stuff like that. Well, there's lots of dragons in our world right now. Human trafficking, the dangers of artificial intelligence, systemic racism, it's endless, right? Serious diseases. Well, pick a dragon and find a problem big enough to test whether this stuff in your head is actually real or not, and see how much of a dent you can make. I'm just free associating it.
No, it's good. It's a good thing to do. I think it's probably a good place to wind up, but I wanted to pull out one other helpful tip, I would say, something that unites our experiences and also some of the other ones we were talking to. And particularly, I was thinking about Robert Anton Wilson. Yeah, he was a creature of his times, but he was also, where was he coming from such that he could play with all of this world that is now metastasized and is organizing people's realities left and right, up and down. And one of it is that he was a journalist and he was a historian. And for me, like having, spent time with both of those modes is really important, because the journalist, you can only be so cool as a journalist. And yet you're providing this incredibly useful function, but you're always there's something grubby about it. And that grubbiness, I think, is actually kind of healthy, because it involves you bringing something from here to over there. And you may be having your own agenda or whatever, but there's some devotion towards the operations of truth that sustain some kind of social matrix of conviviality or awareness of what's going on in the world. And even if, depending, whatever, you can go in different directions. I don't want to talk about it too much, but...
Well, what do you mean by grubby, though? You feel like it's a grubby...
Meaning that, and I mean totally in a good way. And of course, I'm referring to Grub Street, which is, where all the journalists were in London.
Okay. That's an important distinction.
Well, no, but I did mean it in kind of the, like, there's something very unheroic. I mean, no, it could be heroic. That's not the right word I meant. There's something about the labor of it that is very taxing, in the, like, oh, you got to get all this information, you got to pick through it, you got to be hassled, you get people on the phone, you got to hassle them, you got to hassle them some more, then you got to deal with an editor, and the editor's like, this sucks, I got to do this, and you got to write really, really fast, like a day, oh my God, I got a day, oh my God, I can change it, and you're changing it at the last minute, like, but there's something about it that's sort of like, it's very non-academic. It's very non-scholarly, even though you're doing some of the same things. You're gathering information, you're telling stories, you're giving...
So more workmanlike.
Yeah, workmanlike. That's much better. My words aren't all here today, but and that's a really healthy value, but it also is a good practice to help you move between contexts and realize that things over here may be obvious to these people, but not obvious here. And that you can, if you see that, can be a translator. And that's a very positive role, but it also helps you achieve a sort of social value that's not just about your own trip, your own worldview.
It also shows you how to spot how full of shit people can be.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, and there's a cynicism that goes along with being a journalist. You see how the engines of publicity work. You see how politicians lie. You see about how things get hidden, how corporations behave. And even if you're not a left journalist, you still develop a kind of cynicism isn't quite the right word, but a very gritty sense for how reality is actually produced, where the sausage is made, that kind of thing.
Which in itself is a quest for truth in its own way, right?
Absolutely. And then the historical frame is like that on another scale. It's like, look, all the stuff we're saying, a lot of even the same ideas, they've been there before. People have been wrestling with this. But if you can get good at understanding how historical context informs things, then I think you can go like you did with your book. You go back so that you can go forward. Or for me, like I went back to the 70s, not that far, but it's still going back to a time when a lot of people living now weren't alive. But always in light of going forward again, so that when you come forward and you're back at these questions that we keep asking, you have a different angle. You have an angle that's informed by actual human experience, the development of institutions, the layers of literature, the way language has changed, the way cultural identity has changed, all of these actual flows that, the earth is doing through space as it's spinning along. There are also historical changes and things that way people change. And if you can kind of like get right with that flow and sort of aim it towards our contemporary crisis, you wind up with something fresh. So I really encourage people to do that to have that intellectual labor, either journalism in the present or historical frameworks in the past, or both, as a way to like frame this world we're in.
Yeah, I think that's totally. I think the other thing also is that when both of those things, journalism and looking at things as a historian, are about seeing massively huge context. And when you look at things like somebody's individual story just can't survive standing up to looking at the world from that wide of a lens.
The end of our conversation unfortunately got cut off here, so I'm just going to skip straight ahead to where Erik says you can find him on the web.
Pretty easy to find online. I've been at the same website for decades. Techgnosis.com, the name of my first book, TECHGNOSIS.com. And then Expanding Mind is found wherever podcasts are found, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever. And we've been doing that for almost 10 years now. So it's been a long time. I wouldn't recommend listening to the earliest shows because the sound quality is pretty bad, but we've gotten up to snuff, and it's a fun one, and it's motivated, I think, by a lot of the same kind of issues that we've been talking about here.
Okay, I hope you really, really enjoyed that episode. For more episodes, you can subscribe to us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And to fully go for it and hit the hallucinogenic space crystals, you can meet me at www.magic.me, that's magick.me, for full-on magical training. See you in class.